see, Lena's here, Andrew's here, Kyle Clean, Carrie,
Yep,
Joe
I see it
Britton.
now. Yep.
Yep.
And 3 attendees, that would be people that we would give a chance to speak at the beginning, I presume, right? If they indicate such.
Yes.
So since we're started, and assuming everyone can hear me, if somebody who's not on the committee wishes to contribute something here at the beginning, this is the time to indicate your desire to do so, and you will be afforded the chance. I guess no one's taken us up on that. So Patrick, can you bring up that image we talked about, please?
Yes.
And I guess everyone should mute unless you want to speak, and then unmute and dive in. I'm gonna tee this up and then try to get a conversation going. So are we still waiting for that image?
Yeah, just a second.
Okay.
While we're getting ready, I just want to let you know Navarro is going to be coming, but he's running a little late.
Okay.
And for those who may not have had the experience with the Zoom calls, if you find that other people's audio is breaking up, it may be useful for you to unvideo yourself, because that reduces the bandwidth, and that's often been the cure for the problem when I've had that issue.
Can everybody
Okay.
see that? Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this is just a cover image to start off agenda item number 2, which is the Preston Grady area and the smart scale application. So quick background, we talked about this last year in June at a place meeting where we kicked around the city schemes that were prepared by, it's RKK, right? I often get those letters sort of strewn in the wrong direction, but we went over those and examined what was called the modified T, the preferred plan by city staff, and discussed its merits. I presented 3 sketches of my own doing just to broaden the conversation a bit. Since then, the city has applied for that smart scale funding back in, I guess it was early July. But in the months preceding that, a number of people were in communication with the city expressing disfavor of the scheme presented to VDOT. And it includes a petition prepared by the Rose Hill and 10th and Page neighborhoods, signed by a number of people. That was included in the packet that Patrick can bring that up in a minute. And other area businesses and residents voiced concern. There were 2 letters that Navarro sent, one from Carl Schwartz and one from Peter Krebs, requesting a smart scale, a small area plan. And it just seems prudent that place should talk about it some more and formulate a recommendation of planning commission and council about how to move forward in this area. So I'm going to open it up to people that want to chime in and contribute their comments now. I have a bunch, but I'll filter those in throughout the chat.
Mike, perhaps as the counselor in all of this, I really want to emphasize that the sense of council was not, gee, we like this proposal. The sense of council was the timeline of things to get them approved and built is so long that we've got to, and frankly, it makes little sense to have a plan, let's say, done this year when it won't actually get funded for 6 years and probably not built for another couple of years beyond that. And that the advantage of now embarking on a small area plan, and that would come out with a plan particularly for this intersection, And I should add, particularly for this intersection and the corridor on down towards, moving down towards the downtown area, that if we start that now, even that would take a couple of years to get going, but at least it would be a couple of years closer to the time when we will actually be building something. So the idea is we are constrained by that we are constrained by the boundaries, by the budget, and by the rough narrative of what is being proposed. But other than that, we will be free to change over the next 4 or 5 years. We'll be free to change all the details. So when people were getting so upset about, gee, you didn't talk to us, you didn't involve neighborhood planning, whatever, in coming up with this particular design, that was really not a terribly important consideration, because frankly, we were told this is a placeholder. We expect it to be nothing more than a placeholder. So I think we're still writing on a blank slate.
So let me speak to that. And many people feel that's not at all the case, that we might want it to be a placeholder and you might want it to be a placeholder, but it's shown in the past that these placeholders end up having a lot of weight and they become the basis of discussion. They become the presumptive scheme. And the only way to deter that would be to, leadership from your end and recommendations from ours and other commissions, that we really need to start over. Maybe we have to wait till the funding is approved within a year. I understand that's when that happens, to do the start over, but we cannot wait until 2 or 3 years from now and really expect anything other than a massaging of the so-called modified T, in my view. Well,
there is broad support on council for doing a small area plan. This is the intersection that was identified under the Streets That Work analysis as being the intersection that most needed attention. The corridor, the 10th Street corridor, and then the Preston Avenue corridor were 2 of the top 5 corridors that needed attention. So I think that one of the things that we absolutely need to do is to make sure that council, of course, I can speak as one of 5. I can speak with some confidence for at least 2 of the others, but two of the spots are going to be open for election next year, or I guess, 2021. And so it'll be a continuing process, but there is strong support for at least the 3 of us who are continuing to get started with that small area plan and begin that process. And so I think as long as we keep that pressure up, we'll be moving in the right direction. Right. Anyone else want to chime in on this particular aspect of the start the small area plan now and the notion of the placeholder aspect of modified T?
Sure, Mike, this is Brennan. I'll speak a little bit to it just because I've been so involved with this and with council. I think what's being said is accurate on both sides. I think that without a small area plan or some other plan, that the modified T would kind of be the default intersection when we started the design process in 5 or 6 years. So I think having something like the small area plan in place before we actually get that funding in 2026 is important. So the sooner we can get that process started of council approving us to do it, giving us money to start the small area plan, we can do the procurement process for a design engineer to or firm or whoever to start that small area plan process, so that we have something other than what was submitted to go out off of when we start the process in 6 years. So that's really, there's That's really where we're at right now.
And
And
Brendan,
again, this is all sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to know, do you feel the rest of your team and the crew and city staff are also in line with you on wanting to do it in that fashion? That, it's widely held as the correct.
Yes.
Okay.
This was, yeah, I mean, this was the best option that we could come up with as far as a concept for that kind of balanced the transportation needs, the funding. If we make the project too big, then we just can't get funding for it. So, we're trying to strike a balance between, maybe the absolute best solution that's so overly priced that we would never get it funded, versus a very legitimate, solution that we can get funded and we can get built, and improves traffic and pedestrian and bicycle circulation throughout the whole area. So, we're open to trying to figure out what else works. When we originally came up with this concept, we had, 3 or 4 months to kind of throw something together. And then, as you said, we talked last year about this, when we kind of got, well, we didn't get the funding, but we were awarded it, and then the city picked the other project. But,
Right.
And we had said at that point, I remember talking with you, we had said at that point that, there's still going to be time to change this design. And I truly believe that we still have that time to do that. It's really just a matter of, we have to get something in. VDOT requires a drawing and a preliminary budget for us to start the process. So that's really all this is.
It's good to hear that both council and staff support this approach. Then the remaining question is, does VDOT, how?
Okay, before we keep going, I actually have a question about something Brennan just said.
Yeah.
When you refer to sort of the ideal, perhaps expensive project that was expanded, I'd like to know if you're referring to the entire street, or some of the comments that have been made that the boundaries of this particular submission are so small that it could interfere with other potential solutions.
Well, before the answers start for that, Patrick, can you please switch to image A, my annotated sketch, because I think it speaks to what Lena is some of the things she's pointing out.
While he's doing that, I'll start answering the question. I guess it's twofold. One is, yes, the limits of the intersection. I mean, really our top end budgetary threshold for getting funding through Smart Scale is right around a $10 million project. If and that's the top end. You have to have, just because the way that VDOT scores it is they've got a scoring criteria, and they divide that number by the budget to get the ultimate score. So the higher your budget is, the lower your score goes. So,
Okay.
That's
Wrong image,
one
Patrick.
of
Okay, sorry.
the issues. That was one of the issues, is, trying to limit the project size, and really in the city's experience, kind of that sweet spot is somewhere between a $4 and an $8 million project, as far as what we can, get funding for. That's why the West Main Street project, originally we submitted that as a whole project, and we've had to cut it into 4 separate smaller projects to kind of meet those funding requirements to get the score down to something that will win the award for funding.
So,
I guess
but
the second part of that is
that
sorry,
correct?
Knowing what you said, Brendan, about the scale of things, that's also not the right one. It's labeled
Sorry.
A. It's labeled A in the file name. So, Brendan and Lena, it seems to me a small area plan can exceed the appetite and budgetary requirements of a Smart Scale project. So we can establish an understanding of the larger area to take care of projects that'll come in the intervening time, as well as know how to relate the smart scale plan to the surrounding area. So we can have a big eyes for our small area plan, and in the middle of it is this $8 million intersection repair, right?
You compartmentalize it,
Correct.
and then you kind of know what's coming on both sides. And we don't box ourselves into a corner. I think if we can take a bigger view or vision of this space, and then understand what this one piece might be relative to the others.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. When we do the small area plan, it should not just be this intersection. It should, take into account the full corridor between here and Ridge McIntyre. And depending on what council's appetite is, you could go ahead and throw in the 10th Street from West Main and just do this as, a whole combined kind of small area plan of what these look like as they tie together. So, I completely agree. The small area plan does not have to be limited by the size of the application for smart scale.
So the question I have about a small area plan, though, is would it really realistically be done in this 2026 timeframe? Like at this point, if you're talking about initiating a small area plan now, then presumably it goes into the CIP for next year, since we've zeroed out all of the small area plan line item for this year. And then at some point after that, an RFP goes out, unless it's going to be done in-house. And then at some point after that, it starts, right? So, the timeline I'm seeing for how small area plans work, the Cherry Avenue small area plan has been going since, I think, 2016. The Star
It's been
Hill
going much longer than that.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, like, even if we were to do a small area plan, is it really going to be done, let alone accepted and put into the comprehensive plan by the time this 6 years seems like a long time away, 2026 seems like a long time away, but the way things work around here, that's a pretty short amount of time for a plan like this. So what happens if the thing isn't done by the time you're supposed to be building this road?
Well,
Yeah, no,
another way
that's
of
a
asking
legitimate
that is-
question. And
just to put the other half of that question out there, the other way to say that is what does it take to complete a small area plan in 3 years? I mean, that's a tremendous amount of time. Right?
yeah, I think that the Cherry Avenue small area plan has been drug out over probably a 10-year period. And that is much longer than it should be. If you ask the residents, like, I don't know how many, I think that started as this, am I still there? My connection says it's
You're with
going
us.
out.
You're here.
Okay. I mean, Cherry Avenue, I think it started as a staff project and then went to TJPDC, and they've had it for a while. I think, when we write an RFP, we put, we need the deliverable by this date. And we're very specific because we do have, if we get awarded this project, we have a deadline that we have to meet. So we just put it on the design team who's handling it and say, we have to have the small area plan done, in a 3-year time period. And honestly, I think that's plenty of time to do something. We can design and build this whole intersection in, 3 to 4 years. So why does it take 10 years to do public engagement and come up with what the priorities should be?
Because you're
it
talking
shouldn't
about,
take as long as these other things.
but you're talking about neighborhoods that have been historically felt excluded from city planning. And so while, say, West Main includes a lot of business owners and people who are used to being heard, this is a neighborhood that will require a significant amount of engagement with the community. And it sounds like we're at risk of the construction creating a timeline for the community engagement when, we may get a shortened community engagement that doesn't really do what we want it to do.
So
Do
Lena,
you think
you don't
that
think 3 years? Is,
a year of community engagement isn't enough?
Well, I think the problem
It
is,
depends on if there's real community engagement where they're going out to the neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods that have said that they don't feel heard, that they have trouble working with the city because they haven't been felt heard over the years. So traditional regular community engagement is not necessarily going to work. It may require a little longer. It's going to require a lot more upfront work to get community involved instead of, you know, just setting a bunch of meetings and checking boxes and being done.
yeah, I mean, I think the way I see it is that, I mean, Lena's right. We do need to be reaching out to this community, particularly in these areas. But, you know, the way we've traditionally done community engagement has been wholly deficient. And we compensate for that by just extending the timeline. You know, we're now 3.5 years into the comprehensive plan process, but we at no point actually do any better community engagement. So you can drag out the timeline all you want, but unless you change the way you're going to do it, it's not really benefiting anyone. It's just making everything take even longer. And so I think part of the problem is that often when we, you know, specify what we want, particularly when we're talking about small area plans, we increase the scope of work until it's, or the scope of the project, the scope of what's being planned until it's way beyond what anyone can really realistically do in a reasonable time frame. So to me, I think it would make sense. Maybe a small area plan makes sense, but I think in general with small area plans, we really haven't seen, you know, the broad community support for them that I think people like to imagine when they first specify them. So, you know, I almost wonder if it would be better to limit the scope of work somewhat and focus on the intersection and the immediate area and really get the community's opinions on that in particular.
or
Because
would it be
obviously that's something
possible?
people care about.
Is there another vehicle other than the small area plan to properly engage and take on a broader area? I worry if the intersection only is taken on, it'll be a vehicular transportation project, and that's way too myopic.
Yeah, I think
Go
so.
ahead, Fred.
Well, I would say 2 things. One is I think that there is a danger when any process gets stretched out too long and you start to lose momentum. And you can even start to circle back and rehash things that might have been resolved earlier on. So I think having an efficient process that moves quickly but not too fast is important because it keeps focus and there's momentum and people stay engaged and they don't lose interest. I also think that naturally, maybe people in the neighborhoods and people who aren't normally involved in planning and even maybe community engagement are probably more comfortable when it gets down to nuts and bolts and you can talk about specifics and less when you're talking about larger aspirational things. So I think, you know, there is a reason to believe that people like to talk about the specifics of, say, the crosswalk or the sidewalk or this or that. But I still think there's big value in talking about the whole corridor. And I think thirdly, that Mike is right, that it probably should not just be a traffic engineering and you know, a refinement to the roadway layout, but we should be looking at landscaping. There should be landscape architects. We should be talking with urban planning and talking about this whole thing holistically so that we see it as a corridor that is not just cleaning up a very wonky intersection, but making a better connection between this end of town and back down towards downtown.
And a proper pathway through and along the adjacent neighborhoods. We talk about the corridor nature as if the width maybe is only the width of Preston, but I see its minimum width is from Charlton to West. You know, right? We need to bite into these adjacent areas and make sure that there's a happy relationship between those neighborhoods and this corridor.
Well, you know,
That's
why we should be talking to, if we want a shorter or a more robust community engagement. I mean, that's why we should be involving these neighborhood associations in the very beginning, not saying, well, we're just applying and we'll get to them later. You know, they need a heads up to be involved. You have to develop that relationship. You know, starting out the project by not even communicating with them is, you know, it's just gonna create the problem that apparently we're supposedly trying to alleviate.
Yeah, we need to talk to the neighborhoods. Absolutely. I think everyone on place agrees with that.
Well, that's what I heard at the very beginning of this. I think place does, but I'm not sure that staff does, because I heard that, you know, well, we don't need to talk to the neighborhoods yet because we're just applying and it'll be years and years.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Done.
Right. I did hear that. Yeah.
If I can rebut that a little bit, Lena, I don't disagree with you at all. But the way that funding is, you know, in order to do the public engagement on the front end would cost 150 to 200,000 for each application that we do. And we do 4 or 5 of these every 2 years. So you're talking $1 million.
Now, hold on a second.
No, just please.
I'm not.
Listen to
you're
what
not understanding what I'm saying. You're not getting clear what I'm saying. You're responding to something that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying do a full community engagement. I said reach out to the neighborhood associations, send an email, get a few people on board to participate. I didn't say the full community engagement. I said reach out, get some local people on board. That's what
and that has begun.
On board with what? Because without public engagement, there's nothing to get on board with.
Awareness that this is going on, that this is the process, that, you know, there's plenty of things that sharing information could be happening.
Yeah, and
So Brennan, what does that $150,000 cost entail, really, though? Is that just to buy consultants?
That's a right. So that's a public engagement to, you know, hold 3, 4, 5 meetings, come up with some concept drawings. And right now we're including that in our smart scale application. So with Belmont Bridge, with Ridge Cherry, with Barracks and Emmett, all of those have had a public engagement piece on the front end, but the city is not having to put up that money. It's being paid for through smart scale. So if
Brennan,
we take that out of the smart scale process, then the city is responsible for that money. Which
can we talk a little bit more?
I agree is the right way to do it. Yeah.
So you've attached a cost to this community engagement phase, but it's also pretty easy enough for me to imagine a pretty low cost set of get-togethers, like in Jefferson School gym or whatever that space is, where a couple of staff people, no hired guns, no consultants, some volunteers that are already active, like some place and planning commission folks, some earnest neighbors and neighborhood association presidents, and we get together and talk about this without the $150,000 price tag.
Yeah, to that point too, like just like Lena was saying, like giving people a heads up, because I know that many projects, even like here on Place or whatever, like some of us know things are happening, but a lot of people in the community don't pay attention, because even if there's like a 5-second snippet on the news about it, like maybe somebody saw that or didn't, but like a lot of people, one thing that keeps coming up over and over again is people say they're blindsided by this stuff. And I mean, somebody's always going to say that, and it derails things when it finally gets to council, even. Because I know Rachel has talked before about how we spend 3 or 4 years on something and then it gets shut down at council. But like taking the steps that don't really cost any money to just make sure that we start seeding the information out to people, to keep from having those issues later on. And then like Mike was saying, like, it seems like we shouldn't need to be spending this kind of money on community engagement. Maybe at some point to collate the information, but it seems like something we can do either as volunteer committees or just as neighborhood associations or things like this. It seems an inordinate amount of money to me, especially for something that has proven to not be effective.
Well, and I think now, Brennan, I hope you don't feel like we're ganging up on you here, but I think, this is Fred Wolf, by the way. You know, one way to Lena's point of just reaching out when an idea starts to germinate or starts to gain traction, like this should be something that we're looking at. You know, again, if the city were to approach the neighborhood associations, and maybe if we had something like some type of form that we could give them that they could circulate, or set up a website that simply lets people chime in and give, you know, opinions. Hey, if you're going to do that, think about this, because this has always been a problem I've observed, whatever it is. Those two things could be almost set up and allowed to run independently. You know, someone would either have to mail something back, or just, you know, hopefully have access to a computer, go online and register some thoughts. And it could be a pretty good repository without having big meetings and a facilitator and, you know, renting the space and having and everybody could do it at their own time and do it with a certain amount of autonomy, as opposed to feeling like, hey, I don't like to speak in public meetings and whatever. Those two ideas right there, like just a common give us your thoughts form, or here's a website you can go to and just enter any thoughts you have on what might be something to think about for this project. There's gonna be stuff that'll be way outside the bounds of what is important, but you might get some nuggets out of there that nobody ever would have thought about, that could be addressed easily, as long as we know that they're floating around as real concerns, especially if they popped up repeatedly from different neighborhood or community members.
Yeah, I mean,
Isn't this something that?
again, I don't disagree. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Isn't this something that the assistant city manager, the new like futuristic planner, should be grabbing onto and leading into the community neighborhoods?
Ideally, I mean, that would seem like a great step. It's just, you know, I think it's like, how do we make low barrier engagement, and how do we create ways that make it easy for people to feel like they can chime in without making all of the provisions to go to a public meeting, to stand up and speak, to wait through other people speaking who might not want to stop speaking, you know, all those things that tend to either limit people's willingness to go, or just, you know, people have work and we make it easy. We could collect a lot of information, and then, you know, as professionals, whether it's, you know, on the city side or consultants or whomever, then you can make educated choices, and some of those things get reflected. Some of them may not have a place in this process or that, but at least they're being heard, and you can also find ways to go back and re-engage on important points that maybe nobody's thought about yet. It feels like that would be a good way to.
Does it have to be governmental? Does it have to be part of this official small area plan and all of the rules that are tied to that?
No.
Is it possible just to conduct some grassroots community meetings in private spaces where everyone's invited, so that we don't have to fund it through the government, and collect thoughts, and then later submit that to the official process, like Navar pointed out, that inevitably comes later at some cost?
Well, and I think the only thing is, it helps if it's tied to, like, okay, the city's thinking about reworking this intersection. Now
we would tie it to that.
Yeah. I mean, it can't, I mean, generally saying, let's collect that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the problem, though, and I think Fred's really right, is that you need to have an outlet and a way for that information to get passed on, kind of, or not even passed on, but to directly get to the city, right? Like in this process, staff has complained isn't the word, but I'm going to go with complained that, you know, these proposals came out, and then the community started talking within each other, and then all of a sudden they got blindsided by a petition that they didn't realize that those discussions were even happening. So I totally agree that a simple comment form is just a very obvious thing that we should have for any project. But I also think that, like, the attitude of, you know, people are riled up now, and people are interested in this now, and they want to give their feedback now. And under either the small area plan or just the smart scale community engagement process, we're saying, well, you know, sit back, relax, like, we're not going to worry about any of this stuff for another 3-4 years, and then you can come back and you can tell us what you want. But like, that doesn't make sense, right? Like, we have trouble getting people engaged. That's why I guess we spend $150,000 on consultants for any community engagement project, because people like it's hard to get people to care. But right now we have a bunch of people who care. So to me, now would be the time to do that low cost, like asking the people who care what they care about.
Absolutely. And your first question, how do we funnel that information from the grassroots to the official ears? I think that's our job.
I think that's great. I mean, this is Andrew Monshine. I think I completely agree that there have been failures in the engagement process, and maybe that the time to strike is, the iron is hot now, or whatever it is. I do think that one of the important things that we haven't really broached is that it's not just that people say they haven't heard, it's that they don't trust the city at all. And that's because, there's now multiple generations of this neighborhood in particular and other neighborhoods that are often Black neighborhoods, but low income neighborhoods as well, that really they were never the point of the design process in the first place. And so, I think that you would hear a lot of people saying, and I've certainly read this, that the Preston the way it is because it was to get people living northwest of there, commuters and people living in the expensive houses, to the economic development initiatives of downtown. And so because of that is why we have what we have today. And there's very little trust that a smart scale project or whatever it is will actually say, no, this neighborhood is what's important. And so I think if the city wants to get engagement where there's really no appetite for engagement because they don't believe it'll be worth anything, I think it might be worth also thinking about, not necessarily proposing something that is the same as it ever was, but actually making some stipulations about, no, this time we're going to do it this way. And I realize that's actually a bigger ask, and I'm not sure we're prepared as a community to do that, just because bureaucratically we have to make traffic move through and do all these things that are fundamentally going to keep this being a bad road, as a public space and a space that knits neighborhoods together. But I think that if we can come up with a way that we show ideas of saying, this is our baseline and this is where it can go, and we're not going to do the things that we do before, I'm not saying it'll work out because people probably won't trust it, but it's at least a way of starting to build trust. So I think, again, just to kind of summarize that, I think it's about building some trust as well. And I think the city and the community need to come, the city and people like us need to come to the table with ideas that build trust rather than simply say, we want to know what you think. I don't think that's enough necessarily.
Well, and I think on top of that, and piggybacking on what Rory was saying, I think, we do have, people care because they're paying attention because something came out. But I think, we want to get from a place where people aren't always in a position of being reactive, and that we can get to a place where we're thinking more proactively about things, which I think is again, speaks to not trying to just figure out what you can fix or change about what's already there, but being more aspirational about what you hope to see and how we can improve this whole corridor in addition to fixing this one particular intersection. And I think it goes back to, do you change the character and nature of the street and the way it functions, and that it's part of everything it's going through and that it's attached to, as Mike said, the neighborhoods on each side, or at least the blocks on each side. And it's not just a way to funnel you from, Barracks Road and North Rugby down to the downtown.
So just to kind of plug into that stuff, and Lena might want to correct me or have something to say, but for Bike Ped, we did a call with LaToya, who's one of the engagement consultant for the comprehensive plan, and also Jenny, one of the other consultants, but they've been trying to get as much feedback for the comp plan as they can, and they've been really willing to meet with different groups and kind of talk about different engagement strategies, both for the comp plan and also kind of looking forward to the future. So it may be useful looking forward to may have a meeting with them and see what some of their suggestions might be, because this is something, I think, not just this project, something every project we keep coming back to is how do we, because I don't think there's anyone nefariously sitting in City Hall going, how can we exclude the community, and laughing maniacally, but we don't we don't know how to do the work to connect people, because at some point in time there was someone in City Hall maniacally laughing like that. So we're trying to repair that damage, but we aren't there yet.
Yeah, and
And-
to that point, I feel like as part of this comp plan process, we should be asking these neighborhood specific questions while we're reaching out to everybody in every neighborhood with $1 million public engagement process. Like, let's throw in some neighborhood specific questions, and yeah, maybe it won't be an entire small area plan built in for every single neighborhood, but we get some idea of what people want in each area reflected in this overall $1 million plan we're doing. And then I think the other thing is we really need to be, as part of that trust building process, I think you really need to be clear on what the constraints are, because, you know, I think everybody in this room probably is going to say something like, let's make Preston a one-way road with like a 20-foot, you know, bike ped corridor on either side. And, you know, it'll be like this idyllic paradise, but I know that VDOT is not going to let us, you know, bring it down to a tiny road with a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. So like, what are the real constraints that we face in the engineering here? And be upfront with that with people, so you don't just have people kind of projecting this ideal world that there's absolutely no chance that we can get because, you know, we're under these real world constraints. And I think when you don't communicate that, you know, I don't even know what the constraints are really, but I'm assuming you're not going to let it not be 2 lanes, Brennan. But when you don't communicate that, I think you're letting people dream big in a way that's not practical, and that both makes their feedback less useful and leaves them inevitably to be disappointed.
I have an idea. Lena, could you do me a favor and mute your mic?
Yeah, sorry. But
so-
I can, but I actually I unmuted
yeah.
on purpose because I wanted to respond to what Navarre had said.
Okay.
So not a disagreement in any way, but sort of an addition in that, you know, no, I also don't think anybody's like purposefully right now trying to say we don't want community engagement, robust community engagement. But I do think that has been part of the long history and sort of a culture, and that we don't have anybody either saying like really excited about, we really need to do a great job with this. I think there's a lot of great ideas I'm hearing here, but I don't think we as a group are capable of sort of designing that in the context of this sort of one meeting, whether that's done by the city or whether that's done by an independent group. I mean, I think there really needs to be some kind of a cultural shift within the city on how this goes. But we also have like Serena, I know, is listening, and she was part of this group, and she's like impressive in how she knows how to do community engagement in inexpensive ways. She has access to all kinds of you know, websites and ideas and things like that. I mean, I think if we want really good community engagement for this project, that kind of involves its own meeting with people beyond this group, you know, including this group, but the neighborhoods, these, you know, the city, the people like Frank Dukes and Serena who can really help us figure out what that means.
This is Brennan again. I'm trying to listen to what everyone's saying and not butt in too much. But I think that, you know, I agree we can go and get community engagement today, but it's just words. Like at some point we need to take that community engagement and formulate it into a different concept and go back to the community with that. And I don't think that staff or place has the capacity to do that work where we, you know, take all of those thoughts and then try and synthesize that down into, you know, 2 or 3 concepts that can then go back to the public for their thoughts, tweaks, whatever. So that, you know, that's where the consultant fees come in, is synthesizing all of that information and coming up with some designs that can be evaluated further. So I
Well,
don't
Brennan,
agree that, or I don't disagree that just getting people's thoughts is cheap, but taking all those thoughts and trying to come up with a plan is where the cost comes in.
So I get you're kind of an engineering guy, and so that's sort of your focus. That's your job. That's what we hired you for. That's no argument. What I'm talking about is not actually getting the community engagement, but like having real participation in designing what that community engagement will look like. If we want to do something different, let's let some of these people who are interested in this, both in place in the profession, in the neighborhoods, let's let people talk about what they want for the community engagement for this project, and so that we have more confidence in it when it happens.
let me jump in here for a second. I disagree with Brennan that we don't have the capacity or the ability to do it. I think Place does have the capacity and the ability to conduct this initial scheming phase that would then be passed on to the consultants to sift through and test at a more technical level. And even if Place itself is somewhat too small of a group to literally do it, I know dozens of people itching to help facilitate conversations in the private sector here. And the first round of meetings and community involvement and participation, like Lena and Navarre have been talking about, doesn't have to be a city-sponsored event. In fact, it might be better if it just plain old isn't a government-sponsored event, but led by the neighborhoods and those with expertise in the community that want to volunteer their time. And there is capacity. Maybe we're asking for permission. Maybe we don't need permission. But I think that's the phase that should and can indeed happen.
That sounds good. So do we want to talk about putting together another meeting about this, or what would be the path forward if that's what we decided we wanted to do? And is there interest in that? I'm interested.
One concern that I would have of sort of responding to the last comment was, unless you have a fairly clearly defined notion of how you want the discussion to go, you have no confidence at all that what's going to come out is going to be anything other than an unfocused spewing. And at least having a design of some sort that people can react to has an advantage of focusing attention, even if it's negative attention.
Well, we have eight designs, Lloyd. We have 4 that RKK did. I did 3. Craig Kotarski did another that you don't have in front of you. We have plenty of graphics. We have plenty of concerns. We have lists of priorities and attributes and values associated to this. I think it's a matter of getting the people together, and every meeting convened has the risk of falling into a bunch of spewing, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the meeting, right? I think we are armed, we have the tools, we are ready. We just have to get over this inertia somehow and start this darn thing. And if it can't be a small area plan because that has officiousness wrapped around it, then we borrow a space from somebody, we call a meeting together, we mask up, social distance, do a get together with Zoom, all privately funded. I know we could get that done. And Lena's on board. Why can't we all just get on board? What's wrong with it?
Okay,
I think
that was a little bit different from what was being described a few minutes ago. Maybe I should have understood that was what was being intended.
If I can jump off of something that Rory had said with, I think if we go into that, if you guys go into that meeting, you're right. There are, dozens of designs for what this could look like. And if you guys do it without the city involved and without those things set forth of what can and can't happen at this intersection, like what will VDOT actually approve, then we're running the risk of coming up with a design that the community wants that can't be constructed. And then we're back in the same broken trust circle of the city's not listening to us.
Well, Brennan, what makes you think the city is the only source for identifying what can and cannot happen within the VDOT sphere? I know
I'm not
citizens.
saying that we are.
Well, I thought that's what you just said. So the meeting definitely needs to have those constraints presented, but it could be presented by a number of people, right?
It could, as long as they're qualified to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know who you're referencing as far as
Well,
saying
I don't want
that
to speak for Craig, but
I just
Craig
know
Tarski
I
could
just
do it.
know that a lot. Yes, he could. I'm saying a lot of the even when we're facilitating the conversations as a city, a lot of the comments that we get are stuff that just can't happen. And
Of course.
so I think when you get a large group of people together and the conversation is not guided at all, and it's just throw out your suggestions, there's going to be a lot of people that latch on to a suggestion that can't happen. And so
Yeah.
it just needs to be carefully guided. And what I'm hearing is you're just going to get a bunch of people together
No,
and everyone's
here-
going to throw out suggestions. Okay.
You're not hearing
I'm
that.
just hearing it
What-
wrong then.
So,
Okay.
so let me try it again. So I'm advocating a lead facilitated, but not by spending $100,000, just facilitated by some citizens, meeting where the constraints and the reality and the practical qualities, as well as all the other attributes that we talk about, are well presented and clarified and understood, and then a broad discussion about what those things mean to people, where comments and ideas are brought forth, some of which will be outlandish. That's okay. They're fun. Like Fred said, nuggets appear, but no one's advocating for a free-for-all. And the idea that a non sort of official community engagement is a free-for-all is disappointing, because I think it might even be more effective, and it will definitely be led and professional and sound and grown up. Please don't get the impression that it would just be some sort of uncontrolled screaming match.
Back in the old days, when Hoosier was running what was now Neighborhood Development Services, we often had design charrettes that were perhaps the sort of unfocused idea throwing out kind of things that you may be talking about. I'm familiar how those work, and those are the kinds of things that have some appeal to them, but they're also guided. They're guided by specific questions that need to be addressed, and they don't start. It's not the starting point. It may be the second or the third step, but it's not the starting point. And so I'd want to think long and hard about what the first few steps are before we got to the point where we were presenting the public with choices that have a chance of being built, that are legal, etc. And I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out whether what you're suggesting is at all comparable to the sort of the Hoosier-led charrette kind of thing that I have in mind, or whether I mean, frankly, the initial description of it sounded like let's everybody get into the middle of a room someplace and start designing an intersection, which didn't strike me as being a very logical way to approach the problem.
The County of Albemarle does a charretting process, and its master plans and small area plans is very effective. Just with their community planners, boards, and mapping. It's not that hard.
Yeah, I agree with Cliff. It's not that hard.
But it doesn't start the process.
Well, the process has started, I guess, is what we're trying to say. The process has started, and it's time to add this particular kind of thinking into a process that has started.
Okay, I mean, I'd be in favor of trying some sort of a charrette process if I were clear on what we were asking the people participating in the charrette to do, and if it's as a sort of a jump start into a small area plan, for example, it could be very useful.
I think a good next step would be for a couple of place people to reach out to these adjacent neighborhoods and communities and business people through the corridor to get some input that could help us design a charrette, and then we conduct a charrette. Government can come to it, no problem there, but I think it can be a public civilian charrette led by local volunteers to flesh out some initial value statements, judgments, and guiding thinking for what the project should be.
I would like to see something like that. Perhaps, I mean, who leads it is unimportant at this point. I'm happy if it's being led by private citizens who have experience with it and know how these things work, because that's frankly what we were doing back in the good old days. But I think it would be more use and of more value and be taken more seriously if it were seen as a government sponsored, intended to be not external to the government planning process, but internal to the government planning process, and one that we would want to use and expect to incorporate as not something that would be seen as, for lack of a better way to characterize it, hostile, but rather one that we really want to have integrated in what we're doing.
How do you manage that being true?
I think to push back on that a little bit, Lloyd, I think a lot of the people we want to draw in, as particularly for this intersection project and whether we're getting a small area plan, a lot of the people we want to pull in are people who specifically don't trust the city government. So we might get better input from the people we actually want to reach if we don't necessarily hitch our wagon to the city. But that's my opinion. Other people may have a different view on that. But
I understand what you're saying. I also see Lloyd's point in that knowing that they have a vested interest in what this group would be doing would at least say that there's some credibility to the fact that it won't just be an extraneous exercise that the city may or may not do anything with. So, because that's also one of the problems with people participating, and then those processes not necessarily leading anywhere or getting baked into or embedded in the formal process that ultimately happens when decisions get made. So I think if you could, there might be a fine line there to play it, not play it, but to work both sides of what you're saying, Vera, and also to just state that, this is happening. The city's vested in this, there's the blessing of the city, but there's nothing to prevent a group of citizens from getting together and talking about what they hope to see in their city. I mean, it happens all the time. We're just talking about a slightly larger, slightly more formalized version of that.
I'm thinking we do both instead of one or the other. We have a smaller, more informal one with people in the neighborhoods, potentially to get them sort of up to speed on some of the terminology and the legalities and the things that sometimes, sort of no, I don't want to call it educational, but it can be difficult to go into a sort of professional city-led charrette without having sort of the background information, without being a professional in the field. So I don't see why we can't do both. We start out with something sort of informal, get people up to speed. It leads into a city-led one.
Mhm.
I have an engineering question. Who designed the kind of inverted H on the north side that leads into the Martin Hardware and then the adjacent lot thing?
You mean the scheme that was circulated around with
Yes.
the purple and yellow lines? That's RKK came up with that. You think you're referring to the modified T? Does look like an H.
Yes. I don't see how that functions if those lots were developed to their highest potential.
No, it cuts those lots off. There's no doubt about it. That's one of the starting critiques that got everybody riled up, is that the scheme that was sort of gained favor is not the best scheme, it's deeply flawed.
Yeah, I doubt the property owners, Amy Wong and company, would ever be in favor of that design.
Yeah. Right.
I think this sounds great. I hope we do it as a community. Whether there's a city component and a more community-based component, what the order is, I'm not sure. I do want to say, though, just kind of going back to what I was saying before and some of the rest of us were saying, I think that, ultimately, if, whatever seriousness is about doing this, I think there are so many very serious, very good schemes that VDOT would never fund. And I think to some degree, it's really important to say that, if we can't make a promise that, that if the community really doesn't like anything that VDOT will fund, that we won't do it, then I think nobody will really care about this. And ultimately, by the way, I have been and continue to be a professional practicing transportation planner. I know how funding works. It's just true that, cities have to chase funding from states and things like that, putting the cart before the horse to some degree. And unfortunately, that leads to bad situations. And so I would love it to see a promise to say, if none of this works, it's not a great street, but we're going to leave it the way it is, but we're going to invest in some safety improvements. We're going to allocate the money that we have that we don't rely on the state for Vision Zero work in this area. And I know that's not the process, but I do think the goals of the process and what can come out of it is something that people will need to hear about as well. Just my perspective on it.
Yeah, I have to agree with Andrew here that I feel like I realize that in some cases a lot of cases we do need VDOT funding to actually do this, which is a whole nother ball of wax I'll leave alone for now. But limiting our thinking to only will VDOT approve this or not keeps us from making maybe better long-term plans that we might have to find funding for some other way. And I'm not, it's a sticky issue, but I think being only in that headspace keeps us from doing things that might be better long-term for the community, and maybe there are ways to implement part of the plan that VDOT will fund, and then we can do other parts later too. Is we don't have to do it all at once necessarily if we come up with a good plan.
And VDOT's priority is not design. I mean, design in the sense of public space. Their priority is going to be safety and efficiency. And so those two things
Safety is good, by the way. Sorry.
But should they be the primary and first thing that we're worried about as a community in making public spaces? And taking the money just so that we can build something. I'm not saying we don't need the money or that we don't need improvements to this space, but limiting the possibilities so that we can take the money to build something that's awful or equally not effective as a public space, as a landscape, as a community space, I don't think does us great benefit. And we have a number of things throughout the city where we depend on VDOT money, and it's definitely had an impact on what has been allowed or what we've been able to do physically with respect to the character of those spaces and the design of those pieces of infrastructure. And, you know, I get that they wield a ton of power, but you know, it can lead to some things that aren't necessarily the highest and best in terms of the architecture or the landscape or the pedestrian and bicycle experience. Those aren't necessarily, any of those aren't necessarily the priority.
Brennan, could I ask you a question? You had said to council that, and also planning commission, that the three constraints basically, once this proposal goes in, are for the footprint or the perimeter, I guess is a better way to characterize it. The perimeter of the project, the budget of the project, and the general narrative of what this project is expected to accomplish. Let us suppose that in the next 3 or 4 years, we not only are working on a detailed plan for this intersection, but that we are also working on a small area plan that includes the corridor down towards Ridge McIntyre. We know that there is highly likely to be some significant pressure for development of some of those essentially empty lots along Preston Avenue, particularly with Dairy Central being coming online and other people wanting to do similar kinds of things. And we can also anticipate that that is going to draw a fair amount of fire from neighborhoods who aren't going to want to see such large structures going up right next to them. We're going to end up, I anticipate, in any sort of a small area plan that embraces more than simply that intersection. We're going to end up with a political fuss that may end up muddying the waters, shall we say, for a lot of what might be trying to happen within the intersection. Are we running the risk of endangering the ultimate project if we have too many other planning things going on right next door? Do you understand the issue that I'm concerned about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there is that risk. And again, I think we have to be very, whatever planning process that we're going to use to either, proceed the intersection or look at the whole corridor, it needs to be focused and it needs to have a timeline associated with it so that we're keeping ourselves accountable to have a design that's done, or a preliminary design that can be used for when we get the funding for the intersection.
So if we had a design for the intersection, but it's clear that the design for the intersection is going to fit into something, to a more development further down Preston Avenue, but that's not ready yet. Is that going to be a problem if we're seen as sort of preparing ourselves for something that hasn't quite happened yet, but we expect to happen? Is that a good thing or a bad thing in their eyes?
I think so. Yeah, I don't think it matters one way or the other. I said at council, I'm not necessarily against taking the 4 lanes of Preston back down to 2 as a road diet. We are really close to the threshold of the capacity for Preston. So if we take it down to 2 lanes, everyone, council, the public needs to be aware that that's going to be a very congested corridor for vehicles if we do that. But it will give us more room for bicycle and pedestrian. That doesn't if we're going to do that, we just need to make sure that the design for the intersection is adaptable. So basically give ourselves that buffer to start that process and neck it down before we would get to where the corridor would start and where the intersection stops. So again, I think looking at it as a whole really needs to happen, because it gives us that how does the intersection ultimately tie into, you know, the further corridor improvements that are planned. If we're going to leave it as a 4-lane roadway, then, you know, that's good to know, versus we're planning on, you know, necking it down, because how we design the intersection will change depending on which way we want to go with the corridor.
And Brennan, I mean, there's also probably an alternative in there where it's a 4-lane road, but we don't have I don't know what the width of the median is, but if those 4 lanes were brought together and that space was given back to either side or to one side of the street,
You gain quite a bit.
that could also work.
You gain 2 or 3 lanes worth of space.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on our time that we set aside for this discussion. I don't know if we're ready to maybe draw some conclusions about what place should be doing about this, but I feel it's important to let the Planning Commission and Council know that we endorse the beginning of a smart area plan, God, I get those mixed up all the time, a small area plan immediately, following whatever rules and course that has to follow. And then I think we can encourage a neighborhood-based grassroots effort to be going on simultaneously. And I'm happy to be a leader among other leaders in that effort.
Well, folks,
I agree.
this is Alex. Good afternoon. I just want to add a voice to this discussion regarding the small area plan. We've got a couple of small area plans currently going through the interdepartmental review process. And the city is also undertaking a wholesale comprehensive plan update, zoning rewrite, and affordable housing strategy. And I think it's a good idea. I understand that you guys are moving forward with making recommendation to the city council to undertake a small area plan. I think that needs to be put on hold until the comprehensive plan is done. One of the reasons being that the consultant is going to be looking at the corridors. They're going to be evaluating some kind of nodal concepts. In other words, potential areas that has a huge opportunity for some kind of TOD or high density development or middle density development or what have you. So granted that, I think the emphasis on small area plan at this time needs to be put on hold. Now, if you guys decide to make that pitch to the city council, you all can go ahead. You are at liberty to do that, but I just want to add my voice to that discussion.
Alex, when do you think that will be concluded?
We are looking at hopefully early part of the year. They will have a draft comprehensive plan, but the project as a whole is going to be done end of 2021. But I don't think right now that undertaking the small area plan for Preston Avenue is the right thing to do.
I agree with Alex, and I think. Sorry, where am I unmuted?
All right, here we go. So I agree with Alex, and I think maybe something we could ask for is for a particular emphasis on this corridor as part of the comp plan and the comp plan engagement process, so that when the consultants are going around the 10th and Page neighborhood and the Rose Hill neighborhood and asking about things, in addition to their general survey questions, they asked for specific concerns and desires for this area. Because I don't know that it makes sense to do a whole small area plan that we don't have funding for, that won't be completed for another 8 years when we're already doing a comprehensive one. And I guess my other question is, Like, were representatives of the neighborhood invited to this meeting? And if not, why is it up to us to decide how community engagement works?
Got to be up to somebody. I hear almost nothing but how we can avoid doing anything in this conversation. You've got to start somewhere. We started this conversation because we're assigned to have conversations like this. Now we can reach out and go to the neighborhoods. And by the way, everyone who lives in this city was invited to this meeting.
What about the conflict? This meeting started out earlier with that while we're applying for this money, we can be doing a small area plan, and now we're being told, and that there's plenty of time to do a small area plan before the funding comes, and now we're being told that the small area plan can't happen for years and years and years. So that there's a conflict there with sort of what we were told in the beginning and what I'm hearing now. And as far as our place in this, the C in place stands for community engagement. I didn't talk about us doing the community engagement. I talked about us helping work with the neighborhood to ask them what they want from it. Somebody has to be doing this conversation. And so I know those are 2 points and they're completely different points, but I think we need to be moving forward with trying to have some community engagement on this, especially if we're being told that this small area plan can't even think about happening for a few years while we're moving forward with funding the intersection.
I have one question for Alex. Alex, it sounds like from what you're describing as though the deadlines for the product from the consultants seem to have slipped back by about 6 months. Is that accurate?
No, it didn't slip back. They are looking at completing the draft comprehensive plan around the end of the year, and they start the review process early part of the year, and by end, and then around spring next year, they will get on with the zoning rewrite, and then by the end of the year 2021 they have the draft of all the documents, the zoning and everything in place,
including the housing plan.
Yeah, so I don't think, in fact, they need to get the housing plan. They are on a fast track with the housing, affordable housing strategy now, because that housing strategy is going to inform both the comprehensive plan and the zoning rewrite.
Right.
So I think despite the unexpected COVID-19 situation, they seems to be doing pretty good in terms of coordinating things and moving things forward.
And then the second question, dealing with what Lena was just talking about, it seems to me that what we have been told is that if we were to, at this point, begin the process of trying to fund the small area plan, that would not go into a budget that would, that the earliest it would go into a budget, a capital budget, that would take effect in the fiscal year 2021-2022. In other words, that we would put the money in and it would go in and it would be spent during, or they would be allocated during that time. And presumably the work would then be happening on with a consultant to do a small area plan in 2021, 2022, 2023, perhaps. And so that even if we started now with that process, it's going to be 3 years or so before the small area plan would emerge. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. But barring that, I think we have an opportunity right now with the comprehensive plan we are developing. Like Commissioner Starsenberg rightly noted, the consultants, they are meeting with small groups. They are meeting with several small groups based on different kinds of issues and what have you. And it would be a good idea also for them to meet with place design task force, and they can provide some kind of feedback in terms of the corridor. Because I've already met with the consultant. I indicated to them, look, folks, Preston corridor is one of priority corridors we have in this city. There was a discussion about small area plan. However, right now, we're not looking at doing small area plan. There is a smart scale project that is being proposed, and would like them to consider this particular corridor as one of those priority corridors they're going to take a look at in terms of the land use and what have you. So this is an opportunity for them and the place design task force to have a discussion, including the potential developer for Dairy Central and the neighborhood groups, which they are currently doing right now. They are talking to a lot of neighborhood groups, doing some survey and what have you. So this is an opportunity. But in terms of funding, the point you raise is quite in order.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could address Mike's earlier point about action, right? To me, putting this into or saying we should do a small area plan and basically kick it out 6, 8, 10 years, that is the way that we have inaction, right? Like the SIA plan was first introduced or first started in like 2012, and there's been essentially no action on that front except for the independent action by PHA. And I mean, we already discussed the other small area plans. The way we actually get input on this topic now and start to make moves is to have the comp plan specifically address this corridor. And I think that's appropriate in that it's also saying that this corridor is one of kind of citywide significance. It's important enough that it should be a main focus in the comp plan. And so to me, we're already outlaying all of this money. We've already have it budgeted and allocated. We're already doing that outreach. And so to just throw in a couple specific points to address this corridor specifically seems to make tons of sense.
I think as far as some of the stuff Mike's been talking about too, like if like you said, Rory, doing a small area plan is just kicking the can down the road like the city's been doing forever on a lot of this stuff, which again, no specific person, just as bureaucratic momentum, sort of the thing. But as far as getting people together in a more informal grassroots thing, having talked to the consultants for the comp plan, like they want as much data and as much input as they can get. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think going out and talking to the communities, trying to get community input, we can just plug that into the comp plan process and make sure that we are keeping Preston in mind as we're doing that. And like you said, Rory, trying to utilize what we're already doing.
Well, can we maybe run around the panel here and see? It seems like there are two ideas that have been put forth. One, support the small area plan and a grassroots effort simultaneously. And the other is to use the current comp plan effort with an emphasis on Preston Corridor and not use the small area plan, but also, once again, in concert with a grassroots. So how do we go around and get everybody really quickly to sort of see if there's preference for either of those approaches? Just one at a time, maybe.
My first thought on it is that I'm not confident enough on I'm not confident enough of what the comp plan people are going to end up doing with consideration of this intersection and this corridor to know whether I want to defer that completely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one more consideration that hasn't been mentioned is that when you start to have all of these different processes ongoing that are all sort of addressing similar things, you get this process fatigue that really furthers this distrust of the government that we were talking about, where you get survey and survey and survey and meeting and meeting and meeting, and then maybe eventually there's some plan that's output that just goes on a shelf and never gets implemented. And I think if you add a small area plan to this, you're going to get some of that.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, see how the comprehensive plan unfolds. I think maybe a commitment from the city to be responsive to a grassroots effort to provide information when requested and things like that, just to say we're not going to ignore it, but that it's a grassroots effort that has to happen right now and that we should support it however we best can.
The comp plan process should include some outreach to the community. So we should be getting that input as the consultant develops a comp plan information for this area.
So if we're going to have a draft of the comp plan by the end of calendar 2020, is that what I'm understanding, Alex?
Yeah, right now that's what we are looking at.
Okay, so we would know certainly before we finalize the 2021-2022 budget, we would know whether we thought we had enough coming out of the comp plan dealing with this intersection and this corridor that we didn't need to have a separate small area plan process.
Yeah.
And if we didn't like what they were doing, we didn't think it was dealing with it in enough detail, we could then put that into the budget for the coming year and we wouldn't have lost any time.
Yeah, that's an option.
All right, others that haven't had a chance to speak?
I guess for me, oh, was somebody else going to go?
Go ahead.
Okay. So for me, I think like to Rory's point of process fatigue, I know like one of the things we kept coming back to as well was like how the city in general, and it's really evident on like the downtown mall, like we generate tons and tons and tons of paper and not a lot of action. And that's one thing that I hear from the community too, is people are like, well, we did a study on this, or we had something that came out back in 2011 or 2015 for a plan for this area, and then nothing ever happened. And that goes back to the distrust and also people just being like, I already gave you feedback about this, why you're asking me about it again, sort of thing. So I think like Lloyd was saying, maybe seeing where things go with the comp plan might be better to wait a short period of time, because we're already in August here. So like that's a short period of time to delay to see if maybe we want to do something there, but we can start working on community engagement with the comp plan process now, or like maybe not today, but within a very short period of time, and try to start folding processes together. And again, not having these cross purposes, like again, Rory was saying, with that stuff where we have multiple plans going on that overlap and end up, you get two different things coming out. And then again, we have a bunch of paper on the shelf that says three different things. So.
Andrew or Fred or Lena?
I think that this, I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this, because I was feeling strongly, and I'd still feel strongly that we need to be looking at the whole corridor and reaching out. I don't have any problem with doing a grassroots community engagement piece, but it also does seem to make a certain amount of sense if we're only 4 months from having a draft of the comp plan to ask, to see how it's being addressed, and to ask if that can be emphasized as part of this last 4 months, collecting information that could be equally as valuable as us engaging with the neighborhood locally, to have the consultant also doing that, or that we do it and then we feed it to the comp plan consultants. But putting pen to paper and trying to come up with graphic illustrations of what might be options to re-envision the whole corridor again, it seems to make sense to see what comes out of the comp plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mark, Tim?
Yeah, I was just to say, I would follow up with what Fred said. I mean, I think if you go back to the West Main project, I mean, one of the principal underlying ideas there was, that we'd have a product that actually had an actionable result, right? That it went from soup to nuts, so that it wasn't just another piece of paper that kind of got in the shuffle. So it would seem to hold our fire until the comp plan is together and then figure out what the best way to move forward is. But I also think that Fred's totally right, that we need to be dealing with this as a an entire corridor, because Preston has been kind of an anomaly for quite a while now, and that whole intersection area is just a mess. Having a comprehensive way to shoot at it, seems like a good idea to me.
Mm-hmm. So Andrew and Mark are here somewhere, and
I think I said already, but yeah, I'm in support of, grassroots plus going with the comp plan.
Okay. Mark, you were going to say something too.
Yeah, so I've also, have been conflicted on this, because after hearing Rory speak, I was thinking, this group should just step outside our place role and do the small area plan and do our own community engagement and just hand it off to someone. And that would be the fastest way to sort of be holistic. But I feel like we should wait for the comp plan, even though I'm skeptical that the comp plan all the way through the zoning rewrite will ever be specific enough to do the kinds of things that this body is really good at doing, which is a kind of holistic, three-dimensional resolution of a lot of competing factors. It's just, there's too much of the city in the comp plan to really have dealt with this. But there may be principles that come out of it, some of which were in Mike's sketches, that talk about, should this become not a street with a median, but those kinds of things. Should we prepare for more streets crossing over Preston? I would expect to see that kind of stuff in the comp plan. I just wouldn't expect to see a small area plan in the comp plan.
Right. I mean, that is the one thing. The comp plan is a very generalized document, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I don't know, it's such a complicated street, particularly once we separate the two lanes, the eastbound and westbound lanes, then the sort of crossover, as we try to figure out which way do you want to go when you get to that point. It's like,
right.
There could be, I think that, if there could be something that is gleaned out of it that could be beneficial, but I think it'll be helped by asking the consultants to put some emphasis on it, not just hope it shows up for us.
I mean, if the consultants start trying to solve the intersection, then Alex should probably stop them, because they are definitely in the weeds.
Yeah, no, I don't expect them to solve the
That's
intersection.
right.
I think it's bigger picture stuff, like the
Well,
median,
so let me let Lena have a chance at this, and then we actually have to, it sounds like consensus is about to occur here. So Lena, you have something to add, and then we have to move on, I'm afraid.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, in general, I would be in favor of writing up something that really goes into detail about our thought process behind this, instead of a specific recommendation as to what we're thinking and why we're thinking it. I think that, of course, it's great to get more information from the people doing the comp plan, but I doubt we're going to get any kind of really detailed information for this particular corridor in that. And I think we should detail the things that we've heard about, the time frame as far as all these other things happening with the city. I know, as far as people fatigue on things, I know, like, when I've done community engagement for the comp plan, I didn't know if it was doing it for the comp plan, for the housing assessment. It was all happening at once, and sometimes that creates its own kind of fatigue. If somebody thinks they're doing the comp plan and they don't realize it's part of potentially feeding into a small area plan, they may not see the connection there. So I mean, I think talking about engaging the community specifically to this project early, maybe encouraging some kind of grassroots communication is key. I think we should mention our charrettes. I think we should mention sort of all the different things that we've talked about and thought about, and so that council has that information to make their decision.
All right, so what I'm hearing is a majority favoring this idea of adding emphasis to the comp plan and relying on the comp plan work to be the primary move on this area, but encouraging simultaneously grassroots as an okay thing to do. Try to find a way to feed that info to the comp plan and the city. And then lastly, detail this conversation and others that have occurred in a way that Council and Planning Commission can know all of the process thinking.
Yes.
Can we make that what we do with this meeting on this topic?
I'm gonna have to vote no, just because I don't think the comp plan is gonna achieve what we need from this.
Yeah, anybody else say no?
I think, Mike, and maybe this is just my interpretation, but I think a lot of people would like to go along with the comp plan for now, but reevaluate when we see what is in the draft at the end of the year.
Yes.
So that way we can, what will probably happen is there isn't the detail we want, and we'll still want to do a small area plan, but to work with the comp plan for now.
When we still have time. Yeah.
As long as we specify that, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if it wasn't 4 months away, I would say we should plow forward. And
well, who wants a gentleman's bet on 4 months away being true? I'll put
fair point.
Not happening. Sorry to say. All right, look, we got to move on. I think I have it. I'll draft a memo and let you all have a chance to critique it before I send it out. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So we only really have one more item, but we have a person from Place who sits on this comp plan committee. I guess it's called the Seville Plans Together Steering Committee.
That's
in charge of those three things that we hired our consultant for. So we've always had a representative on it, only it's been Rachel Lloyd, who's no longer a member of Place. Now, as far as I know, by rule, Rachel Lloyd can stay on that committee and even report to us from time to time, but probably makes sense that we assign an official Place representative to that committee. A lot of today's discussion points to that being useful. Is anybody interested in being that person?
I'd be interested in doing it. I've attended some of the meetings and have been involved in it. I don't feel like I have to do it, but I would definitely be interested in doing it.
Anyone else? Going once.
I guess just as disclosure, I'm already on there for a different committee, so it shouldn't be me.
Well, I'm in favor of supporting Rachel's continuing because she's got other reasons. There are other reasons why she's a good person there, and we can always talk to her. And then since Navarre's on it and adding Lena, we have three sets of ears that can be communicating back to Place.
And thank you, Lena, for doing that.
You are not appointing extra person, are you?
We don't have anyone on it now.
Okay, so Lena is gonna be taking the place of Ms. Lloyd.
I understand from the committee, they want to keep Rachel as an ad hoc or whatever. That's up to the committee. I don't know the rules, but the official Place person, I guess, is going to be Lena. We're about to say yes to.
Well, I thought you guys said she will continue, Ms. Lloyd will continue to serve on you people, on Place's behalf.
We did talk about that at our last meeting, which was in March, but I think we've been asked to just talk about it again.
Okay, all right.
And I think we can have our cake and eat it, as I understand the regulations.
Well, I don't think it's in the regulation.
Well, so Rachel stays on as an adjunct, ad hoc, whatever you call it, and Lena's the Place rep.
Okay.
Seems like a smart use of talent. All right, so I'm just going to put it this way. If no one says no to that, I'm going to hear yes.
Fine by me.
All right.
Yes.
Okay. So that.
No objection here.
Okay. We have a slot for new business, and I actually put it there for Tim Moore. Tim, if you wanted that slot, because you were talking about you might have something you want to share, but if not, we can just leave it open, or if anybody else can take that slot.
I could quick say a few things. The BAR is wrestling with a couple of projects where lighting has definitely gone off the rails, like the standard. I don't know if you all have noticed that, but it does a very good job of lighting the flats across the street.
It lights up the airport, I think.
Pretty much blinding any. I think it's an approach run for the helicopter. I think it comes in there and hangs a left over to the hospital. It's pretty atrocious. And then, so the BAR, we're trying to get our heads around that, but there's just, with more and more of these larger projects, it's just becoming really apparent that we need some sort of a lighting zoning strategy. And I know I've talked about this before, but I think, perhaps the vehicle for really getting that underway is the BAR, because we're kind of at this point doing an ad hoc run at this sort of thing. Like right now, over on Virginia Avenue, there's a project going through the approval or review process. And we basically stipulated that they really needed to protect, have fixtures that had not just full cutoff, but really didn't have glare. CRI was 90 or better. And we wanted color temperatures in 3000 and below. And we also wanted them to be fully controllable. That was particularly the case. It has an open under building garage that, if that's on 24/7, it's just blasting light out. And so our feeling is that, something like that should be on motion detectors and probably have a much lower setting as its typical setting during the evening. I mean, it isn't a quasi-residential area, but having a coherent way to deal with this, I think, is going to be really important going forward, because the LEDs are really, the amount of punch they can pack per watt is just, people just don't get it yet. And we're having a lot of issues with glare and just really crappy lighting. And I know Andrew and I and Mark Schuyler and Phil Ayana and a couple of other people from the astronomy department have been kicking a lot of stuff around over the last year or so. And it seems like some of that has gained some traction, but I've been away a lot and the whole COVID thing has not helped. So maybe Andrew has some slightly more specific things to point out there, but we haven't given up on the lighting fight. Let's put it that way.
No, I don't have anything to add. I mean, I think that the key really has been the inertia. And I think the last we spoke about it in place, Alex said that, incorporating lighting to some degree was something that the consultants might do or something like that. Alex can speak to that, but I think ultimately, yeah, that would be a very progressive thing to do, is to incorporate lighting zoning into the way Charlottesville does things. But that would, again, that's a big initiative. A lot of what we talked about already applies to this as well. So not, I think, maybe Alex can say if anything regarding lighting is coming along, or maybe Rory with the comp plan, but I doubt it. I don't think so.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything specifically recently, but I do recall from the Gallery Court application, there were some lighting considerations as part of that, and we talked about the standard. And as I recall from that, I thought the city had actually stepped in and made the standard change out their lights already. So are we saying that it's still too bad? And then I guess if it is, where did things go wrong that the remedy that we suggested was still bad? And then last question, is the light problem entirely facing West Main, or are we saying that there's rear facing light as well?
What I'm referring to is on West Main, and it wouldn't surprise me if there were other issues surrounding that particular building. But part of it is that, one, the color rendering is bad. Two, the lights still seem to be, or at least a number of them seem to be on all the time. And, they don't appear to have any control capacity in there. Given how they're arranged, what they are, those should be just a very low, basically, character lighting, like actually you see in the flats, where the flats has some small sconces that, just give a little bit of definition to the wall and a little bit of sparkle on the street. Those are pretty effective, but the things they have on the standard are, the fixture itself is pretty dismal, all by, but it would help it a great deal if it was properly lamped. It looks like they tried to do something, but whatever it was, kind of ended up with a half-assed result.
I can support that the BAR is the primary lead on this topic, and maybe it remains background for places efforts. Seems fine with me. Anybody else?
I mean, the one thing to me, it seems like the BAR actually has, some, legal punch. And we're also directing, trying to deal with this on an ad hoc basis. And I think ultimately that's going to bite us if we don't actually have a pretty consistent way of dealing with this. And it's something that is stated.
Yeah, I think just FYI, staff is also following up with the owner or the developer of standards right now regarding that issue.
Yep.
I just want to let you guys know.
Great.
And Alex, was there a previous time where we made them change out the lights?
Yeah, we made them turn it off. I think initially when they opened up, they probably felt like, okay, well, now maybe folks are not paying attention, but because that's a lot of things. We're getting a lot of violation on several things. They thought that the city wasn't paying attention. But anyway, our zoning folks are in touch with them, and currently discussing the issues with them right now.
All right, so I see we still have a couple minutes left. We also have two people attending the meeting that are not on the panel. I saw Mark and Peter and Sean, I guess, on that list. If you guys are still here and want to add something to the meeting, please indicate that. You'll get a chance.
I think.
All right, it looks.
Yeah.
It looks like. Oh, Peter would like to speak. So can we make that so, Patrick?
Yeah, just a second. Go ahead, Peter. You're on. You're on with Place.
Hey, Place. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to chip in. So I want to be super clear that in general, PC is strongly in favor of smart scale at the state level. We fought at the state level, and you've seen me fight and bleed for smart scale projects locally too. This one we chose to oppose for reasons that you already know. And I think that City Council took the position which is reasonable, that we could get the context right ahead of the funding becoming available. So that's all good. That's a good plan. And you guys have talked a little bit about what the process is to get that context right. And I think you're on a good path. Couple of things I wanted to put in there, which is that as I had said in the chat, that the comp plan and citywide rezoning is going to set preconditions that need to be figured out before a small area plan is decided. Like what this corridor is for is properly decided in the comp plan, and then a small area plan will figure out how to do that. And also the comp plan can talk about issues that are going to be extremely important. For example, Brennan said that if we do a road diet, there will be congestion. Well, actually, I would like to, congestion doesn't have to be a derogatory term. I'd like to see this road operating at like a D level, where if I want to cross the street, I can. It's not an auto only space. And you can say that in the comp plan. The comp plan can say this is, this is a retail area, this is an urban area, not a suburban area as it's currently designed. Also, although Lloyd didn't say this, we have to be really thinking about the budget environment that we're about to come into. I'm going to fight for stuff like small area plans in the next budget cycle, but it's going to be really hard to add a small area plan, and if the budget looks anything like we think it's going to look. So let's think about other ways to do that. And I think you guys talking about doing it in a sort of in-house way is pretty smart. And there are other ways than city line items in the budget to do that. So for example, I just opted not to apply for a Robert Wood Johnson Healthy Communities grant because it's really for localities, not for nonprofit organizations. So I think there are some interesting ways to have like community-based design that help us figure out how the citywide vision of this place ought to play out on the ground. And you guys are doing that on a regular basis, and thank you, and keep it up.
All right, thank you.
It looks like Sean Tubbs also like to speak as well. Is that okay, Mike?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Sean, go ahead and unmute yourself. You're on with Place.
You'll have to unmute yourself.
You have to unmute yourself. He's there you go. Go ahead.
You guys want to talk to me? I don't have any comment.
Oh, you don't?
Did you guys say anything? I was going to say, I did put in the chat, this isn't really a comment because I don't really make comments anymore, back to being in journalism, but I did want to just ask a question about what histories are there for the corridor. If you go back to the 2001 comprehensive plan, there is a vision for Preston Avenue. I know that Tool Design did a mock-up as part of the 2015 Streets That Work charrette from that summer. So just as you go forward, and as I will be writing about this in the future, just that history and taking whatever ideas have already come up and putting them all in one place is probably a good idea. That's all I was going to say.
Was that also that Preston Avenue walking tour? Was that part of the Tool mock-up, or?
I think so. I'd love to see those notes. Like at some point, I think that there's been, I don't know if Brennan was there at the time. I think this was in, I remember something about it.
I was there, and it was part of the walking tour. And I don't think it was the whole corridor. I think they had some just really like back of the napkin designs, both for this intersection and for the intersection at Ridge McIntyre. But it didn't really look at the whole corridor from what I remember.
Yeah. Anyway, that was that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Get all that together so we're not doing another throwaway repeat. Well, if nothing else, we're right at the time where we would typically adjourn. So short of someone wanting to get the last word, I guess we can call it a meeting. Is that
so? One last thing I'd add is if we're going to have the consultants for the comp plan do or add questions related to this, we should really reach out to them sooner rather than later, because their time frame for doing most of their community engagement, according to their presentation on Tuesday, is pretty quick now. So we should probably get this on their radar at least.
okay? We can do that.
Hey, don't cut yourself in front of us, please.
All right, everyone. I have a 2 o'clock, so I'm going to bow out. I think maybe we're adjourned anyway.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see everyone. Bye.
Thanks.